I was 14 when my parents shipped me off to my grandparents' old farmhouse for the summer. It wasn't a punishment, just one of those get some fresh air, city kid things. The place was straight out of a time capsule. Creaky wooden floors, yellowed wallpaper, and that weird, musty smell old houses always seem to have. My grandparents were sweet, but clueless about how bored I was. No Wi-Fi, no friends, just miles of cornfields and the occasional cow staring at me like I was the weird one. The first few nights were uneventful. Just me, my sketchbook, and the sound of crickets chirping outside my window. But then, on the fourth night, I found the radio IT was tucked away in the attic, covered in dust and cobwebs like it hadn't been touched in decades. An old, brown Bakelite thing with a cracked dial and a frayed cord. I only dragged it downstairs because I was desperate for anything to break the monotony. That night, after my grandparents went to bed, I plugged it in, expecting static or maybe some distant country station. Instead, nothing. Dead silence. I messed with the dials, frustrated, until the clock struck exactly 2:17 a.m. Then, without warning, the radio crackled to life. A voice, low and urgent, cut through the white noise. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel." My blood turned to ice. No one had called me by my full name since I'd arrived. That I jerked back like the radio had burned me. My first thought was prank. Maybe my grandparents had some messed up sense of humor. But the voice didn't stop. It was raspy, like someone speaking through water, and it kept saying my name. "Daniel, you need to listen. You're in danger." I remember my hands shaking so bad, I almost knocked the radio over. How did it know me? I hadn't told anyone here about the nightmares I'd been having back home. The ones where I'd wake up choking, convinced something was sitting on my chest. But then the voice whispered, "You still hear it, don't you?" The breathing in the dark. My stomach dropped. No way. That wasn't possible. That I tore the plug from the wall, half expecting the voice to keep talking anyway. The room went dead silent, but my pulse was roaring in my ears. I sat there on the floor, staring at that stupid radio like it was a snake about to strike. Part of me wanted to chuck it out the window. The other part, the part that kept me frozen, needed to know more. After what felt like hours, I plugged it back in. Nothing, just static. I waited, heart pounding, until the clock hit 2:17 again. The second the numbers flipped, the voice returned, clearer this time. "You shouldn't have come back," it said, almost sad. Then, quieter, "He knows you're here now." Paragraph 5. The voice didn't sound like a recording. It felt alive, like it was reacting to me in real time. When I instinctively whispered, "Who are you?" the static hissed like a sigh before it answered. "A friend. Maybe the only one you've got now." Call for my grandparents. But the way it said it, like it was pleading, made me stay. Then it told me something that made my skin crawl. "Check under the floorboard by your bed. The loose one." How did it know about that? I found it the first night, fiddling with it out of boredom, but hadn't told a soul. My throat went dry as I knelt beside the bed and pried it up. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, faded with age. The image showed a boy who looked just like me, standing in front of the same farmhouse, but the clothes were all wrong. 70s bell-bottoms, a ratty t-shirt. He was smiling, but his eyes were wide, terrified. Written on the bottom in smeared red ink was, "Don't let him in." The radio crackled again. "That's why you're here, Daniel. You're a repeater." I didn't understand. Then it said the worst thing yet. "He takes one every summer. This time it's you." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window like something was testing the lock. The voice dropped to a whisper. "He's at the door now. Don't turn around." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocking started soft, like fingertips brushing wood, then grew louder, thud, 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 each hit shaking the doorframe. My grandparents' room was down the hall, but the house stayed silent, like the whole world had gone deaf, except for me. The radio's voice turned frantic. "Daniel, listen carefully. You need to break the mirror." My eyes darted to the dresser across the room. The old, tarnished mirror had been there since I arrived, and I'd avoided looking into it too long because my reflection never seemed right. "Now!" the voice screamed as the doorknob began to rattle. I grabbed the radio and hurled it at the glass. The shattering sound was deafening. For a second, everything stopped, the knocking, the voice, even the wind. Then the room went cold. I could see my breath in the air, and the broken mirror shards, they weren't reflecting the room. They showed him, a tall, gaunt figure in a stained flannel shirt, his face stretched too long, his mouth sewn shut with thick black thread. He was standing right behind me in the reflection. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Then the radio, now silent and dead, suddenly blared one last sentence. Too late. He's inside. Before the lights went out, the darkness was suffocating. I could hear breathing, wet, ragged, right next to my ear, but when I swung my arms wildly, they hit nothing. Then the floor creaked. Something was moving in the blackness, circling me. The voice from the radio had gone silent, but I could still feel its warning hanging in the air like a curse. My legs finally unlocked, and I bolted for the door, only to slam into something solid. The smell hit me first, rotten corn and old blood, before I looked up into that sewn-shut mouth, those hollow eyes. He didn't grab me. He just tilted his head like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Then, from somewhere deep in his chest, came a sound like a voice trying to escape through stitches that I don't remember how I got past him. Adrenaline, maybe, or dumb luck. I just remember sprinting down the stairs, my socks slipping on the wood, and bursting into my grandparents' room. They were still asleep. Too asleep. I shook my grandpa's shoulder, screaming for him to wake up, but his skin was ice cold. Then I saw it. The same black thread from the man's mouth, stitched delicately across their lips too, like they'd been silenced in their sleep. The house let out a groan, the walls warping like something was pressing in from the outside. That's when I realized the radio hadn't been warning me about him coming in. It had been warning me about what was already here. I was 12 years old in the summer of 2006, back when kids still played outside until the streetlights flickered on. My parents called me the little detective because I'd snoop through junk drawers, crawl into abandoned tree forts, and once even found a wedding ring buried in our backyard. Turned out it was Grandma's. She'd lost it gardening. But my biggest mystery was Mr. Lasky, the neighbor at the end of our cul-de-sac. His house was the only one with blackout curtains year-round, and he'd stare at us from his porch, his eyes like wet marbles under the brim of that same stained fishing hat. That July, when Mom mentioned he'd left for a family emergency, I saw my chance. I waited until my bike ride around the block turned into me crouching behind his overgrown hydrangeas, heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. The back door was unlocked. Why was it unlocked? And the smell hit me first. Mothballs and something sweet rotten like forgotten fruit. The kitchen was frozen in time. Yellowed newspapers stacked to the ceiling, a single plate with crusted gravy in the sink. But it was the hallway that made my skin prickle. Dozens of framed photos hung crookedly, all of kids. Different kids. A girl with braids grinning on a swing set. A boy in a soccer jersey, mid-laugh. Their faces were normal, but the way they were arranged, like a shrine. My fingers brushed one frame, and that's when I heard it. A thud from below. Not the house settling. Something heavier, like a sack of potatoes dropped onto dirt. Then silence. The basement door stood ajar, just enough to show stairs vanishing in a black dot. My throat went bone dry. Every kid in my grade had whispered about Mr. Lasky, how he'd worked at the morgue or collected roadkill. But this was worse than any story. The smart thing would have been a bolt. But then I saw it. A rusted key dangling from a nail beside the basement door. Like a dare, my fingers closed around it, the metal biting into my palm. The stairs groaned under my sneakers, each step exhaling a puff of dust. Halfway down, the temperature dropped like I'd stepped into a freezer. My breath came out in white wisps, even though it was 90 degrees outside. And that smell came back, thicker now. Not rot, copper, like when I'd busted my lip falling off my bike. The flashlight on my phone barely cut through the gloom, but I could make out shelves lined with mason jars. Clear liquid, floating things. At first I thought they were pickles, until one turned in its brine. A hand, pale as a peeled potato, fingers curled like it was reaching for me. I choked back a scream, staggering backward, and my elbow knocked over a jar. It shattered, fluid splashing my ankles. That's when the moving started again. From the far corner, behind a hanging tarp, a slow, wet dragging, something breathing in rasps, like air sucked through a punctured lung. The tarp rippled. Something was standing behind it. Tall, too tall. And then, scratch, 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 fingernails on concrete coming closer. The tarp jerked sideways, and I saw it for half a second. A stretched out shadow of a man, but wrong. Its arms were too long, fingers brushing the floor like knotted rope. No face, just a dented and hollow where eyes should have been, glistening wet in the dim light. It let out a sound, not a growl, not a scream, but a whimper, high and broken like a hurt dog. My legs finally woke up. I spun to run, but my foot landed straight in the spilled jar fluid. Something squished between my toes. I didn't look. Couldn't. Behind me, the scratching turned into a thud 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 as it lurched forward, its breath now a wet rattle. The stairs seemed miles away that I took the steps 2 at a time, sneakers slipping on the wood. Something grabbed the back of my shirt, fabric ripped, and then I was free, bursting into the kitchen. I didn't stop to shut the basement door. Didn't stop when my bike handlebars gouged my ribs as I crashed onto the pavement. I pedaled until my lungs burned, Mr. Lasky's house shrinking in the distance. But halfway home, I realized my foot was still sticky. I looked down. My sneaker was soaked red. Entangled in my shoelaces was a clump of black hair, roots still clinging to flecks of scalp. I'd buried my shoes in the woods behind our house that night, hands shaking so bad I could barely dig. I told my parents I'd lost them in the creek. For weeks, I slept with my baseball bat under my pillow, jumping at every creek in the house. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I could still smell that basement. Copper and formaldehyde clinging to my skin no matter how many times I showered. The worst part? The local paper ran a tiny blurb about Mr. Lasky's return from his trip. No mention of missing kids. No police cars at his house. Just him back on his porch, staring down the street with those glassy eyes, like he was waiting for me to slip up and look at him again that I never told anyone. Not even when another kid, a sophomore from the high school, went missing that fall. The cops called it a runaway case, but I knew. I'd seen his picture taped to a locker, same crooked smile as the boy in Mr. Lasky's hallway. Sometimes I biked past the house, slow enough to see the basement windows. They were always dark, but once I swear I saw a hand press against the glass from the inside. Pale, too big, fingers splayed like it was testing the strength of the pain. I moved away for college and never went back. But last year, my mom texted me. Remember that creepy neighbor? They found bones in his walls. The article said the house was empty when they tore it down. No tarp, just a locked basement door and scratch marks on the outside. Even after all these years, certain sounds still make my blood run cold. The creak of old floorboards, the rustle of a tarp in the wind, even the innocent gurgle of a jar being opened. I developed this habit of counting kids at playgrounds whenever I pass by, matching faces to memory like some messed up bingo game. My wife thinks it's just anxiety, but she doesn't know about that summer. She doesn't know that sometimes when I'm shaving, I'll stare too long at the mirror, terrified I'll see something moving in the reflection behind me. The worst part? That basement didn't just ruin my sense of safety, it ruined my curiosity. The little detective in me died that day, replaced by someone who always checks the locks twice. Last month, my childhood friend Derek tagged me in a Facebook post, a news article about time capsules being dug up at our old elementary school. There, in grainy color among the Polly Pocket toys and Pokemon cards, was our 3rd grade class photo. And standing at the very edge of the frame, barely in the shot, was a tall figure in a fishing hat. The caption listed everyone by name, except him. When I zoomed in, the pixels blurred where his face should have been. I called Derek, laughing nervously, asking if he remembered any parent volunteers who dressed like that. Dead silence. Then, dude, what the hell are you talking about? There's nobody there. I hung up and deleted the app. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Now I keep finding strange things, a single black thread on my doormat, faint scratches near the basement drain, my dog growling at empty corners. Maybe it's paranoia, maybe not. The other night, I woke to the smell of mothballs and opened my eyes to see my bedroom door slightly ajar. From the crack, something glistened, a single wet marble of an eye, staring. I blinked and it was gone. My therapist says trauma can play tricks on the mind, but she doesn't understand. Tricks don't leave footprints in the carpet. Tricks don't make the neighbor's kid ask why the tall shadow man waves at me through their window when I'm not home, that I know now that some doors, once opened, can never fully close. Whatever lived in Mr. Lasky's basement didn't stay there, it followed me. Not in the way horror movies show, but in subtler, crueler ways. It's in the way my daughter's toys sometimes move by themselves. In the way our cat hisses at nothing in the exact spot where I buried those shoes 20 years ago. Last week, I found an old photo tucked in my work files, a blurry shot of my childhood street. In the corner, barely visible, stand a figure by our fence. Long arms, fishing hat, and though the photo was taken in summer, his shadow stretches impossibly long, reaching toward our house like frozen smoke. I burned it in the grill, but the ashes left behind, they smelled like copper. This happened when I was 9 years old back in 2012. We lived in this old two-story house in the suburbs, the kind with peeling white paint and those big, drafty windows that rattled when the wind picked up. My bedroom was on the second floor, right above the backyard, which was basically a wall of trees after the first few feet of grass. I was a quiet kid, obsessed with dinosaur books, and staying up past my bedtime to read under the covers with a flashlight. But that summer, I stopped feeling safe in my own room that I started with the shadows. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced someone had just moved outside my window. Not like a branch brushing the glass. Something deliberate, like when you sense someone stare before you actually see them. The first few times, I chalked it up to nightmares. But then I saw the face, just for a second, pressed up against the window like it was trying to see around the edge of my curtains. Pale with hollowed-out eyes and this weird, stretched smile. I froze. My window was 2 stories up. There was no balcony, no tree close enough to climb. Nothing that I finally told my mom the next morning, my voice shaking so bad I could barely get the words out. She checked the window, even went outside to look, but just shrugged and said it was probably a dream. "Sweetie, nothing could reach that high," she said, rubbing my back like she used to when I was scared of thunderstorms. But I knew what I saw. That night, I taped my curtain shut with duct tape, the kind Dad used in the garage. It didn't help. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a slow, scraping sound against the siding, like something dragging itself up the wall. The next day, I begged my dad to check the backyard. He humored me, scanning the grass under my window before pausing near the tree line. His face went stiff. That's when I saw it too. Deep gouges in the dirt, like something heavy had been dragged into the woods. And then, half buried in the leaves, a ladder. Old, rusty, the kind no one would just leave behind. My stomach dropped. Someone had been watching me, and they'd brought a way to reach my window. Why Dad didn't say a word. He just grabbed the ladder, his knuckles white around the rungs, and carried it to the garage like it was evidence. Mom kept asking him questions, her voice tight and high, but he just shook his head and locked the garage door. That night, they moved me to their room, but I could tell they didn't sleep. Dad sat by the window with a flashlight, scanning the backyard every few minutes. Around 3 a.m., the motion sensor light flicked on near the trees. No wind, no animals, just that sudden, glaring light flooding the yard. Dad bolted outside in his slippers, yelling something I couldn't make out. When he came back, his face was gray. The police came the next morning. They took the ladder, asked me questions about the face. Were the eyes big? Was the mouth too wide? And walked the tree line with their hands on their hips. One of them paused near a patch of flattened grass, then crouched down. When he stood up, he was holding something, a small, dirty stuffed bear. My bear, the one I'd lost at a park across town weeks ago. The officer's voice was calm, but his fingers tightened around it. "You said you've never seen this person before?" he asked. I shook my head. "Then why did they have my toy?" That night, the police left 2 cruisers parked in our driveway, officers taking shifts to watch the house. Mom made up the couch for me in the living room, where I could see the front door and the hallway to the kitchen, no blind spots. But around midnight, the power went out. Not just ours, the whole street. The hum of the fridge died, the night light in the hallway blinked off, and suddenly, the only sound was my own breathing. Then tap, top, top. 3 slow knocks on the back door. Not frantic, not accidental. Deliberate, like someone who knew we were listening. Dad grabbed the baseball bat from beside the TV. The officers drew their flashlights, the beams cutting through the dark as they moved toward the kitchen. One of them whispered, "Stay behind me," but I could see his hand shaking. The knocking stopped. Then from right outside the window, above the sink, a wet, ragged breathing. The glass fogged up in uneven bursts, like whatever was out there was pressing its face against it, inhaling the scent of us. The officer lunged forward and yanked the curtain back. Nothing there, just the pitch-black outline of our yard and a single, smeared handprint on the glass, too large to be mine. The cops searched the yard again, flashlights sweeping the trees, but found nothing. We were told to sit tight while they called for backup. That's when we heard it, the creak of my bedroom window upstairs sliding open. A sound I'd know anywhere from summers spent sneaking comics after bedtime. The officer's radio crackled to life. Unit at 142 Maple confirmed possible breach before cutting to static. Dad sprinted upstairs before anyone could stop him, bat raised. I'll never forget the scream that followed. Not his. Not human at all, by the time the cops got there. The window was wide open, curtains fluttering in the wind. My bedsheets were torn, deep claw marks raked into the mattress. And on the wall above it, smeared in something dark and wet, was a single word: soon. The ladder was gone. No footprints, no fingerprints, just that word like a promise. We moved out the next day. The cops never found who or what did it. But sometimes, when I'm back in my hometown, I drive past that house. The new owners swear their kids complain about the smiling man outside the window. And every time, the motion sensor lights are already on.